Since practically the beginning of time, commercial-grade steam wands have been inaccessible to home baristas unless, of course, you shell out thousands of dollars for a high-end machine. But not anymore. But before we get into that, do you know what this is? Most of you might have already seen this before and already know what this is, but if you're not educated, let me educate you. This is the Bellman stovetop steamer, and it was one of the first steamers that you could take home that was essentially a boiler from a steam wand, kind of just sitting out in the open. That's a raw boiler, baby. I don't know about y'all, but I treat my boilers like I do sashimi. Raw. I could have gone with a different joke for the word raw, but I didn't. I spared you because I love you. And not only does this steamer have legacy status, it has a personal attachment to me. This was actually the first way I had to steam milk at my house when I first got into coffee, like a million years ago. Hit the like button if you're also an elder barista. But almost 10 years ago now, I had this Bellman steamer, and it was the way that I would make cappuccinos at my house. And it was the way I would practice latte art. And its entire history, it has been incredibly accessible. It was under $100, I believe most of the lifetime it's had. And it was something that even a baby barista like myself at the time could afford. And not only was it accessible, it would steam milk really well. It wasn't the best, but it was pretty good. It actually did the job. And when you were camping, you could easily make perfect cappuccinos wherever you wanted to. But there were also tons of caveats with this machine. It was piping hot all around the thing. You could not touch a single part of it without it getting hot. Even the handle, where it's supposed to be safe to touch, would get kind of hot. And especially the knob, which is right where you're supposed to turn off and on the steam. That thing would get so hot you had to use a towel to turn off and on your steam. But with the juxtaposition of everything, there really wasn't enough room. With the picture, I'm rambling, but you get what I'm saying. It was pretty cumbersome. It comes with safety checks, of course, but there is always a chance that those safety checks gunk up with scale the more you use it, especially if you're using it camping. I doubt anybody was putting non-scale water in this when they were using it, especially back in the day. So there's a chance this thing could, ruin your face. But today, I know, long intro, we made it through. We're actually talking about a new product on the market that is not the Bellman, not even related to the Bellman's company, but it goes without saying, once you see this, you will undoubtedly compare it to the Bellman, because it is essentially the same mechanics. This is the Flair Wizard Steam Wand. You might be very familiar with Flair for their portable home espresso machines. You can take them camping. They are not usually electric except for their upgraded versions like the Flair 58 Plus, the Flair 58 Plus 2. I like to call it the Flair 58 Squared because it's Flair squared. I think that just sounds really cool, even though it's not technically the name. They're also popular for some hand grinders and a few other tech that they've been making, as well as popularizing puck screens on top of coffee. They were one of the first, if not the first, to implement this in your routine. And it was because in their Flair 58, they didn't have a group head above. You had to have some kind of screen to prevent that water from just pounding on the coffee below unevenly. So they have a reputation, and now they are starting to veer into the world of milk steaming. So your girl's gotta say something. Now, a lot of people will say this looks just like a Bellman. Yes, it does. Nailed it. Time to go home, the video's over. While it does look like the Bellman though, this is its own category. I believe that it has its own class because of some of the choices that they made here. But before we get too deep, I need to let you guys know that I did work with Flair. You're actually going to see in relation to this steam wand, I did a latte art tutorial for them, and they're gonna post it on their channel. And I'm also doing a giveaway this next week. We're giving away one of these steam wands, so I'm making them a little Instagram reel. And essentially that is the extent of our business. This review, this is on me. They have not seen it. They do not get a say in it. And this is my opinion based on this steam wand's capabilities. The main body or boiler itself is made of stainless steel and it holds 700 mils of liquid. So it's not as big as a Linea Mini. I believe the Linea Mini is 3.5 liters. I could be wrong, but I did compare the two, and the Flair steam wand does hold up. It just loses its steam power much quicker than something that you'd see in a larger boiler. It has a rubber grip on the top lid, making it super easy to take on and off, very similar to a portafilter and a group head that allows you to twist it on and off at a 1/4 degree, not like the Bellman where you have to screw it on endlessly and make sure that it's actually tight. This one simply twists in. It almost feels too smooth. It just kind of locks in a little too easily. And then when it builds up pressure, of course, it has a much more stiff resistance, but I don't know, it kind of scares me. Just one of those little things. It kind of freaks me out. I'm scared I'm going to move my arm really quick and it's going to accidentally explode in my face, but it's never done that yet. There is a chance of getting more fuzzies on top. I have cats and sometimes I get a little dust in my room. I have a lot of gear and stuff, so dust can accumulate, and you can definitely see it in a lot of the shots. I tried to not get any dust in them, but hey, what can you do?
And on top, you'll find your pressure gauge,
which reads your pressure and your bars as you go along, albeit in a very traditional classic Flair style where they give you a little bit of information, but not all the information. That being said, there is a corresponding chart that you can check out that lets you know where you are in terms of your steam pressure. Similar to the lid on top, the knob that you use to turn on and off the steam wand works in a 1/4 rotation as well, meaning you don't actually have to turn it very far to get it to turn on, but you still have a little bit of granularity when you do it that you can kind of control the steam. There's pretty much very light steam and all the way on, but it does turn off really quick too, so you're not going to end up opening it up too much and then having to chase it. The steamer can work on any surface you have. It can do open flame, it can do induction, it can do stovetop, it can do coil, it can do a camp stovetop, it can do anything you want. I personally like to use this induction burner, and it is the one that kind of looks like it has a marijuana leaf on it. That's crazy too, right? I don't know. You tell me if that's a 420 induction burner down in the comments. I can see a lot of people having this and then having it live on their stovetop. So not necessarily something you would take camping, something you just keep filled on your stove, and then in the morning you press go on your stove, or you turn the knob. I don't know who presses go on the stove. And then it heats up, and then you have steam, just as powerful as you would get from some kind of home machine. Maybe one of the coolest features on this device is its automatic steam release mechanism. I'm going to be honest with you. This scared the shit out of me the first time it happened. I literally jumped. It is so loud and so scary, but I am thankful it's there because it actually keeps the steam at a really nice level when you happen to not be paying attention. It'll say, hey, take me off the stove, but if you don't, this little valve on the side will pop open on its own and it will spray steam in every direction, but it'll do that diffused so you don't end up burning yourself. And the Bellman did something similar. When it would raise up and the steam pressure would get really high, there was a safety valve that would allow some of that steam to vent off. This is a little different though. This actually opens the steam 100%. It's not like a little outlet. It's like shoving steam out in every direction. Thankfully, not in any direction where your hands are. It eventually stops once it gets back to a normal pressure. It kind of is like magic a little bit. Maybe that's why they call it the wizard, but when it stops on its own, I'm always like, ooh, spooky. How did you know? You can also vent your entire steam supply manually using this little tool. When you press it in, it's going to release steam in the same way. It's very quick. And then there's no more steam in there. So you can just pop open the top and dump out the water and you're good to go. This adds in the convenience factor, though it is still, again, a really intense thing. And I don't know if I like it or not because it does scare me. It is loud. And sometimes when I was making drinks, I felt like I had to race it because I would have my heater plate just enough to keep it at the right temperature. But sometimes it would just go one pace ahead of me. And if it ever got a little too hot, it would go psh and burst in every direction, which is a good thing. But at the same time, it does use a little bit more of your steam to do that because then you have to get back up to temp, you have to build pressure again. So it will drain your supply of water faster if you let it do this constantly. So really it's a user error to let it do that. But it's also there as a safety mechanism, which is a give and take, a good thing, I think. One of the more essential things that makes this steamer stand out is its cool touch steam wand. And not only is it cool touch, it's also mobile. The Bellman, you could not move the steam wand. It was fixed. It was also very narrow. It still made great steam, but this makes better steam, and you can actually touch the steam wand while you do it. That was a big deal. Now I use the steam wand, and if I'm a little off angle, I can actually touch it and adjust the angle, which is much more convenient than you think it is until you actually get to use it. It's also incredibly loose whenever you feel it. Like, here's a little jiggle test you can see. Look at that. Things jiggling all over the place. And finally, at the end of that steam wand comes with a 2-option steam tip. The Bellman steam tip was fixed and I believe you could not replace it, but this version has 2 steam wand tips. One is a single hole steam tip with a larger diameter, and the other is a 3-hole steam tip with slightly smaller holes, which gives you a little bit more impact whenever you're steaming. I would say that the single hole is good for beginners, and the 3-hole is really good for someone who wants to fine tune their milk but knows what they're doing, because a lot more steam is going to come out, and it's going to come out in different directions versus the one-directional steam hole that you get with the single one. And each one is going to affect kind of how you steam very subtly. It's not a big deal, but you can see it right here. The single hole steam tip took a little longer to steam than the 3-hole, but essentially they both make very similar milk. The single hole is probably going to give you slightly looser milk and be more user-friendly if you're a beginner. Personally, my favorite is the 3-hole steam tip. I'm just used to using those. I think they work a lot better. It reminds me of using a commercial machine. And isn't that kind of the whole point? One of the biggest issues with the Bellman was that it was hot all over. You could not touch any part of this thing without feeling the burn. However, with the Flair Wizard, there are multiple spots you could put your hands during the steaming if you had to. I mean, the steam wand, the knob, the handle, the top. Though, of course, the middle section is still piping hot. Don't touch it and don't twist that top off. Don't do it. As far as setting up, it's incredibly simple. You just twist the top off, you fill it up to the line, depending on how much you want to use. I always fill it up to the max, and you twist the top back on and put it on your induction burner or however you're heating it up. And essentially, that's it. There's also a silicone gasket in between the lid and the actual steam boiler, and I would prefer to keep that somewhat dry on the top whenever you're putting the lid on. I just noticed a little bit of spurts of water underneath the lid whenever it was a bit too wet, so I just recommend you dry it before you put it back on so it gets a much better seal. How long it takes to heat up is going to be dependent, of course, on your heat source and the physics of how that heat transfers into your liquid. Are you using cold liquid? Are you using room temperature liquid? What are you doing here? When I use cold water, it takes about 6 to 8 minutes to heat up on that induction burner back there, set at 10 with keeping my eye on it. I think when I was making drinks for it, for the videos I've shot, it was giving me like maybe 10 full drinks before I'd have to refill it, including all the times I let it vent off in the background because I was keeping it piping hot just so that I could keep doing drinks back to back. And I wasn't keeping it on a middle number, I was keeping it pretty hot. So there were a lot of times it would vent off. So I think your drink use is probably somewhere between like maybe 15, 20. And if you're letting it vent off constantly, it's somewhere between like 8 to 12, something like that. It's pretty reasonable, especially if you're only making 1 or 2 drinks. So it is dependent on how much you use it, and it's dependent on how much you let it vent off, and of course how hot you're letting it stay the entire time. But you'll actually get a pretty good indicator physically when you know it's starting to get low. Whenever you start to steam, you're always going to dip a little bit in pressure because you're releasing pressure from the steam wand. But usually, depending on the heat source, it'll keep that pressure at a maintained spot. Somewhere in the realm of creating pressure, it'll maintain it. If you kept it on forever, no, it would drain your entire steam wand. But something like a commercial machine usually has enough power and input and size to kind of keep it somewhere in that range. And this does too, but you will notice a tapering effect as you tend to use it more. Once I started to go really low in the boiler without having to disassemble it and check, I just inherently knew because as soon as I would turn my steam wand on, my pressure would dip incredibly quick. There's always going to be a little dip, but this is a much quicker dip. It would go from the max all the way down to the bottom, and my milk wasn't very good at mixing. The foam would still sit on top and it'd be kind of crunchy, indicating that there's just not enough pressure in the steam to mix that milk thoroughly. So you will know 100% when it starts to fail on you. But dude, this thing can throw the milk out of the pitcher if you're not careful. You kind of want to use a taller pitcher if anything. I was using smaller pitchers for all of my steaming, and I don't think that was the right choice. But it has a kick, and when you turn it on, it is really intense. As for the quality of the steam, it is super dry. I would say comparable to a Marzocco, though there are differences in the two. The Marzocco, of course, like we said, has a larger boiler and is able to maintain pressure throughout the steam, almost as if nothing happened. Like you turn on the steam wand and it loses a little pressure, but it just stays right there. That's the power of Marzocco, baby. But this machine can almost do that exact same thing. It is powerful enough to throw the milk out of your pitcher, has enough width in the steam holes to actually inject efficiently, doesn't take a lot of time. They're comparable, and I'll show you on the screen right here. The one on the left is going to be a La Marzocco machine, and the one on the right is our Flair, and they are pretty much the exact same pour, though of course there's slight textural differences. The Flair was just a little thinner. I'm talking like marginally thinner, which is actually kind of cool because you can see how the effect of being slightly thinner changes the dynamics of the pour, but you're getting what I'm saying. Like they are essentially able to do the same thing. I think that's really cool that you can have something in your house that can do that and is capable of making that kind of texture that you could, compete with if you really wanted to for less than $2,000. I mean, the La Marzocco itself is in the $5,000-$6,000 range. So it's a pretty good deal for what you're getting, I think, as someone who makes latte art for a living. So finally, the overall impressions and the price. I think this is a really great deal. I think that this is something that is extremely accessible for baristas in the same way that the Bellman was many years ago, but I actually think it's a lot better. I think it stands in its own category, and I know there are a few things that people are going to be upset about, not being electric, maybe that loud steam thing. I don't know if people are going to vibe with that or not. I do think it'd be cool to see electric. I just don't think that it's 100% necessary, and I also don't really expect that of Flair, whereas some people have said they did. It is what it is. But yeah, I generally have really good impressions on this thing. I really enjoyed using it. I could see myself using this in a competition if there ever were one I had to compete in the forest or something like that. For $200, I do think that's still accessible. I think people can afford that for the most part. I don't think everyone can, but I think it's right there at that line where, like, if it was any more than that, I would start to feel a little skeptical. And if it was less than that, then great, sounds good. But in 2025, what can we expect? Now, we fluctuate on this channel between 70 and 80% of the people that watch these videos not being subscribed. You're doing me dirty. I get it. I watch a lot of videos and forget to subscribe. But now is a great chance for you because you've already made it all the way here. So you might as well hit the little button. It takes like 2 seconds. But other than that, that is it for me, guys. Cheers, and I hope you have a really good rest of your week. Bye.